What is up, everybody out there in YouTube land? This is Jose once again from PetRockMedia.com. We are back with another video, and today, fresh off the announcement of the R5 and R6 from Canon, we are going to dive into the pros and cons, pluses and minuses of these two cameras, and which camera you should invest your hard-earned money in here in the next coming weeks. Roll the intro. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, punch that bell icon so you'll be notified each and every time we post videos. It really helps out the channel, helps keep the lights on, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to stop on by. So fresh off the announcement from Canon this past Thursday, which wasn't the greatest live stream, but straight off that announcement, we have the Canon R5 and the R6. Now, everybody's been drooling and waiting for the Canon R5, and to me, it didn't disappoint. Yes, it was hit with the Canon crippling hammer, stealing from Camera Conspiracies. I'll leave his channel down below. Great YouTuber. Definitely recommend you check him out. But yes, the Canon R5 was definitely hit a few times, or maybe nicked, with the Canon crippling hammer. But for the most part, it delivered on a lot of areas that everybody was drooling and waiting for. Now we're going to get into the pros and cons and my ultimate recommendation for you as a YouTuber and just a content creator, which camera I would recommend picking up and which camera I am personally probably going to pick up. But we'll save that here towards the end. So we'll start off with some basic similarities. Bodies look pretty similar. The Canon R5 does have a little bit more girth, has a little bit more thickness to it. It's a bigger boy, it's a bigger body. But the Canon R6 is still no slouch, and it brings the top dial, which a lot of people were looking for, versus the Canon R body, which had that sensor bar, that touch bar to the left or right. Never really got into that bar, but now you're bringing the toggle back and forth, the physical turning button, which a lot of people were looking for. So that's coming back to the R6. They both have amazing 5-axis in-body stabilization, 8 stops of in-body stabilization. Sony only has 5. So right off the bat, Canon, you can see, is competing directly with Sony, and we're still going to be holding off on Sony announcements, but for what it's worth right now, Canon beat them to the punch with in-body image stabilization. 5-axis, 8 stops on both bodies, the R5 and the R6. That's very important to keep in mind when you're comparing the two. They both offer 12 frames per second mechanical and 20 frames per second electronical. So that's pretty fast frames per second that you could still get on both bodies because they are mirrorless. You don't have the mirror flapping up and down, so it is an incredibly silent operation. The R5 is a little bit more silent than the R6, but again, that's something to think about when you're comparing the two. For a lot of our work that's creative and shooting videos, it may not be a problem. But if you're going to be utilizing these for photography, weddings, things like that, where you have to be ultimately quiet while a ceremony is going on, then the R5 might be a little bit more advantageous for you. Again, they're both very quiet, but the R5 is just a tad bit quieter. Now, all the batteries are the same. However, from what I've been reading and what I've been told by other reviewers is that the new camera bodies are able to utilize the software that comes with the cameras in conjunction with the batteries to provide you with a little bit more battery usage, if you will. I think it's 14 to 18% more battery life with these new software style batteries. Now, again, it uses the older batteries as well. It's just those newer batteries which have kind of a little reflective sticker on them. That's how you know that they're the newer batteries. And again, there's software combined with the battery and the camera to provide you with a little bit more juice, if you will. Now, that's where the similarities as far as physical attributes on the camera bodies kind of stop. Again, they're both going to be pretty similar in size. Weight is a little bit different. Weight, the R6 is definitely lighter. But again, you're going to want to read the full spec sheets for yourself. I'm not going to bother and bore you with all of those specs, but you're going to want to read those and find out for yourself. Now here come the differences. And one of the biggest differences that not a lot of YouTubers are talking about, there are a few that are bringing it up, but not a lot, is the lack of certain codecs. Now on the Canon R5, you're going to get IPB and all-I video codecs. Whereas on the R6, you're only going to get the all-I. Now we saw this difference when the Canon RP was released alongside with the R. The RP didn't have the certain codecs, and you could tell a little bit in the video resolution and the sharpness of the video. It was pretty noticeable, and you can look it up on YouTube to see those differences with those two codecs. So it's going to be interesting to see what these codecs look like on the brand new image sensor and on the brand new camera science that these cameras are coming with. So keep that in mind as we move on through. Now I'm going to be referring to my notes here on my iPad Pro, so if you see me looking down, that's why. The R5 is going to have one CFast card slot and one SD card UHS 2 slot on there. Now this is important as we move on through the rest of the differences between the two bodies, so keep that in mind. The R5 is going to have one CFast card slot and one UHS 2 SD card slot, whereas the R6 is going to have what we're used to, the two SD card slots UHS 2. The R6 has a brand new 20 megapixel sensor, whereas the R5 has a brand new 45 megapixel sensor. That's something that you're going to have to think about when it comes to your creative work. Are you going to need more megapixels? Because again, just because your sensor has more megapixels does not always guarantee better results. Low light capabilities, we've seen sensors with higher megapixels suffer in low light situations with higher ISO ranges. You start introducing digital noise, which can harm your video and especially your photos, depending on the sensor. So that's something you definitely need to think about. So now we're getting to the screens. The R6 has a 3-inch 1.62 million dot screen on the back of it, whereas the R5 has a 3.2-inch 2.1 million dot screen on the back. Obviously the R5 is going to have some specs that are tweaked just that much more from the R6. Obviously the difference in price, which we're going to get to, is going to justify that. But again, you need to justify it to see if that's something that you're going to need for your creative work. The R6 does 10-bit 422 with C-Log and HDR. I mean, God. 2 years ago, or even as long as a year ago in 2019, we were begging for, 4K 60p. That would be the ultimate camera. And we're going to get to the R5 and the R6 video specs, but I mean, that was one of our ultimate cameras. And for the R6 to do 10-bit 422 with C-Log and HDR internal is just, I mean, Canon knocked it out of the park in my opinion. Okay. Again, thinking about your gear needs, what is it that you're going to need in order to create the best product and the best content that you are known for producing? Think about that as you're going through the rest of these pros and cons. Now, here's where we start getting into the differences that for me are going to make or break your decision for the R5 or the R6. So the R5 will shoot RAW, but will only shoot RAW in 8K. They didn't want to give you RAW in 4K or 1080p. So you can only get that RAW capability for now, unless they update it with the firmware update. You can only get RAW if you shoot 8K. So think about that again. Think about that as you're preparing to purchase CFast cards if you don't already own one, okay? Because now we're gonna get into the topic of space and CFast cards and their expense, and thinking about that as you're looking at which camera you wanted to purchase. So if you're wanting to take advantage of 8K, which again, why would you be purchasing the R5 if you're not gonna shoot in 8K, right? So a typical 64 gigabyte CFast card, which will run you about $150, $200 or so dollars, right? A 64 gigabyte CFast card that will only give you 3 to 4 minutes of 8K footage. Heard that, 3 to 4 minutes of 4K footage for one 64 gig CFast card. But then you're telling me, hey, PetRock, I'm gonna shoot on 256 or 512 cards, so I'm fine. 256 gig card will give you about 14 minutes. A 512 gigabyte card is gonna give you about 30 to 35 minutes of good solid 8K footage. 30 minutes of 8K footage with a 512 gigabyte card. 512 gigabyte cards retail for about 500 bucks on the cheap end. Angel Birds can be a little bit more expensive. And now the available 1 terabyte CFast cards. They are available, they are there. You're gonna see one here, and they're pricey. They are super expensive. So factor that into your overall formula and your overall budget as to which camera you plan on buying. And if the R5 is the one that you're looking to potentially get, think about the price of those CFast cards, because I highly doubt majority of you have just 1 terabyte CFast cards lying around, unless you're shooting with some of the other cameras and you potentially could have bought one to have a large card to hold a ton of photos. Now that 1 terabyte of a CFast card is going to be eaten up by that 8K footage, because with a 1 terabyte CFast card of 8K raw footage, you're going to be looking at about 50 minutes of footage. 50 minutes of 8K raw footage. And that is with 1 terabyte card. So thinking about your workflow, okay, think about how you're going to be working with these cards and as you're going to be filming your projects and your content. If you have one card, right, 1 terabyte card, let's round it off to $1,000 after shipping, tax, whatever. Let's say the card runs $1,000. Let's just even say $800 on the low end. Let's say you're able to find a steal of a card. You cheap out on the memory cards and get an $800 memory card. And now you're out in the field shooting. That's 50 minutes. So you're going to have some type of backup that's going to back up that card, because if you're shooting feature length content, hour to 2 hours worth of a finalized product. If you're shooting weddings, a lot of these wedding videos can come out 30, 40 minutes, but you shot 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of footage, depending on if you've been there from the beginning to the very end to the dance. That's sometimes a 12 to 15 hour day. So thinking about that, having a 1 terabyte card that can only hold roughly about an hour's worth of footage, you can't tell the bride and groom, stop right there, let me swap out my card, let me copy this card over to my hard drive on my computer, and then you stick it in. Give me about 20 minutes or so, because if you don't have a super fast reader, again, that's a whole other topic, your footage is gonna take a while to transfer over to the hard drive. So you have to factor in, you're gonna need a multiple amount of these cards. Let's just say if one can get about 50 minutes, let's say at minimum for a wedding, you're gonna need about 6 cards, right? 6 terabytes. Think about that. At $800, 8 times 6, where my math people at, put that down below. It is a boatload of money. On top of the price of the bodies, which we're gonna get into here in a bit, you need to think about all that money, hard drive space on your computer. If you're shooting 6 terabytes worth of footage, and then you're gonna go on and edit it, and that's on one wedding project, you're gonna have to think about how many projects you have and how much storage you're gonna need. You're slowly gonna start creeping in to petabytes worth of storage, not terabytes. You heard that right with the letter P, petabytes. You may already have that right now, but that's really, really something you need to think about when you're looking at these two cameras and comparing the two, because the R6 can shoot 4K 60. Okay, and that was one of the highly wanted features of many cameras was 4K 60. The R6 can do that, and the R6 does it on UHS 2 cards, SD card slots. Now, a lot of us already have those cards lying around, and you can get 128 to 256 gig cards, which can hold a decent amount of 4K footage, and you're not creeping into that petabyte files just yet. Unless you're shooting tons and tons of weddings a month, and you have multiple camera operators, and you're just out there shooting tons and tons of footage, then you might already be in that petabyte range. But for most of us who shoot 1 to 2 weddings a month, or maybe 6 to 7 a year, you're not gonna have to worry about upgrading tons and tons of storage just yet if you get the 4K 60 that the R6 can offer. Now, on the subject of footage, to me, one of the major differences, and this is my opinion, is that the lack of 1080p at 120 frames per second on the R5. I mean, you're crushing it with this camera. It offers 8K RAW, it offers 4K 120, but for some reason you don't give 1080p users 120 frames per second. Now, it could be, well, somebody who's gonna film in that's not gonna be looking at the R5. Well, the R5 you could have had right there as a jack of all trades, just ultimate powerhouse of a camera that can shoot 120 at all types of resolution. And to me, Canon dropped the ball right there. That was one of the swings of the Canon crippling hammer, and it didn't hit it quite right in the middle, but it nicked it a little bit, and that's something to think about as well when you're looking at comparing these two camera bodies. Now, the big issue, overheating. Now, on the spec sheet of Canon, they are saying that you can get roughly 20 minutes of indoor style of weather temperatures inside, 20 minutes of 8K RAW before the camera starts overheating. And I don't know about you, but here in Texas today, right now, it is 7:30 in the evening and we are still at 103 outside. That's here in South Texas. Now, I know not everybody lives in South Texas, but for my content creators that do, this is definitely something that you're going to have to keep in mind, because in normal indoor settings and indoor temperatures, you're getting 20 minutes before the camera overheats when you're shooting in 8K. So again, why would you buy the R5 if you're not gonna shoot in 8K? Once you start shooting in 8K and you're outside, 7:30, you're hitting that magic hour right now. Here in Texas, you're starting to hit that golden hour, if you will. The sun is starting to set because it's summertime right now. And you're gonna wanna grab your camera, go out and grab some footage. 20 minutes is what you can get indoors. Outdoors, I'm going to guesstimate at about 10 to 12, maybe even less, before the camera starts to overheat. Because you have to keep in mind, this type of footage is normally on a big cinematic camera that have fans consistently spinning to keep that sensor cool. These mirrorless cameras, they're not like that. That's why they're small and lightweight. They're missing all those features of a cine camera, but again, now you're having to suffer with the outdoor elements and the high temperatures. So keep that in mind as you're going through and you're thinking, which camera should I get? Because if money's no object for you and you have the perfect budget to get either one, then that's something you gotta think about. Start weighing the pros and cons. Could Canon potentially fix this with a firmware upgrade? Who knows? But that's something to think about launch date, which camera you're going to wanna get. There's pros and cons to both. Now we're getting to pricing, right? So the Canon R6 is gonna come in at $2,499 or $2,500 body only. whereas the Canon R5 is gonna come in at $3899 or $3,900 body only. And these are US prices. Canada, don't even get me started. My apologies. You're going to pay a hefty penny for these cameras, especially that R5. Now the R5 is expected to be released July 31st, so here in a couple of weeks, where the R6 is slated to come out end of August or September 1. So you're going to have to wait over a month or roughly a month if you're trying to get your hands on that R6, which in my opinion was a blatant marketing tactic by Canon to try to get the R6 sold faster, because again, I think they know that the R6 is the sweet spot that a lot of content creators are going to want to use, but they're trying to get that R5 out there so that way you can start thinking, well, maybe I could justify spending that a little bit of extra money. Maybe I'll get a new lens later on down the road. I already have decent RF glass, or I've got the converter and I'm using my EF glass. And you know what? I will get the R5. I'll deal with the overheating. I don't shoot outside. I shoot indoors for my YouTube. And I'll get the R5. In my opinion, I think that's what they're banking on, for people to have this camera available early. So that way most people can change their mind and say, you know what? I'm going to go for the R5. Me personally, I think I'm going to be leaning more towards the R6, but I'll give you my final thoughts here in a bit. So taking into consideration both the pros and cons, money aside, just overall build quality, they're both amazing, amazing cameras. You're not going to be disappointed with either one of these cameras. Now you're going to have to invest a little bit more money with the R5, but again, both great cameras. And I think Canon, just like Jared Polin said, was the sleeping giant, I believe, of the mirrorless camera world, and they knocked it out of the park with the announcements of these two cameras. Now we're just holding on and waiting to see what Sony does with their new AAS line, and we'll see what they come with here in the next coming weeks, hopefully. So, my final thoughts on either the Canon R6 or the R5. This video has been pretty long already, so I'm gonna cut to the chase. One of the other YouTubers that I watch a lot, Manny Ortiz, shout out to my internet brother, we got the same last name. He mentioned 3 specific reasons why you would need the R5 over the R6. 1, the 8K. If you are promising to deliver in higher resolutions and are going to start marketing your availability and ability to shoot in 8K, then the Canon R5 is obviously going to be your choice. Even though the 8K modes are there, there's obviously other modes you can shoot with, but again, 8K is where it's going to be at. If that's the space that you want to live in, if that is the content you're trying to create, if you need to crop in, then shoot it in 8K, which is already an oversampling of an 8.2K down to 8K, no crop. You're needing that type of footage. You're working for high-end companies. You are working for Lamborghini, you know, different companies that demand high quality, super sharp imagery. Then the R5 is going to be where it's at. Second, you absolutely, along with all the reasons I just said for those particular clients, need 4K 120. You absolutely need that 4K 120. Then that the R5 can produce, and that is going to be where you're going to be at the Canon R5. And obviously megapixels. Now again, we talked about that when it comes to low light performance. Again, depending on your content that you create, if you're normally a wedding photographer, event photographer, and you don't shoot in bright daylight and you shoot in situations that are low light, always having a higher sensor does not always equate to better low light capabilities, especially depending on the glass that you're using. So in conjunction with the higher sensor and your awesome glass, you still may have a little bit of noise introduced. So that's something to still think about when it comes to these two cameras. So 8K, 4K 120, and the 40 plus megapixel sensor of the R5 are the 3 reasons that I also think would put you in the R5 camp and would place you at purchasing that camera body. If that's not you, then I can see no reason as to why the R6 is not your sweet spot camera. Now we're still going to have to see what these codecs look like when they're filming. So we're still going to have to wait and see on sample footage. I know Peter McKinnon has some, and I know there's other Vistec imagery that I believe posted some videos of them filming with it. The IBIS on these cameras is just phenomenal. I mean, I don't personally see a reason anymore as to needing to take a gimbal unless you are running through mountains, running at high speed, and you might need a gimbal to stabilize that footage a little more. But the way this 8-stop image stabilization that's on these camera bodies, and they both have it, is just phenomenal. But again, I digress. Going back to what I was saying, we need to see what this footage is going to look like coming from the Canon R6, since it doesn't have both codecs. Since you're only able to shoot in IPB on the R6 and not all I and IPB, gonna be anxious to see what the footage looks like coming out of this camera. But again, that aside, I still think the R6 is gonna be the sweet spot for most of us content creators. But that wraps up this pretty lengthy video, guys. I just, again, wanted to give you my pros and cons for both of these cameras. Ultimately, the decision is going to have to be based on your creative style, your content, what you're trying to create, your clientele, what you offer, and the investment you're going to make in your company. If you're trying to set yourself apart and you feel the Canon R5 is going to provide that, then definitely look at getting the R5. But again, think about all those additional costs that are going to come with getting the R5. The R6 is still no slouch. It still has a very capable sensor. That 20 megapixels is still going to be more than enough to do all your weddings, things like that. And if nothing else, be a great second body. Way back in the day, and Peter McKinnon brought this up too. Way back in the day, I used to shoot with the 5D Mark II, which revolutionized video as we know it. And my backup body was a 50D. So I had a full frame plus a crop frame, and I used the crop with my 70 to 200 to get that much closer to the bride and groom up at the altar as I was shooting weddings. And I feel like the R5 and the R6 can provide that kind of tag team of one powerhouse body and one's very, very capable powerhouse body. But again, if your goal is that 8K, that 4K 120, then it could be very, very complementary to your R5. Let me know what you guys think down below. Are any of these cameras interesting to you? Do you plan on picking one up or pre-ordering any one of them? Or are you gonna pay attention to see what the EOS R, the original one, see what it does in price? Because again, that camera is still no slouch. I mean, a lot of Peter McKinnon's or majority of his content was created with the EOS R. So that's something, it's not a slouch. You know, that camera is no slouch. So think about that other option as well. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Again, thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your way out and punch that bell icon. And this is Jose once again from PetRockMedia.com, signing out, everybody. Peace.